Welcome to Bite the Talk, a podcast hosted by the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, known as GAIN. Join us as we discuss all things food systems related: diets, nutrition, environment, health, you name it. Meet fascinating people working in the nutrition and food community. Tune in to Bite the Talk and let's explore together.
Welcome to this episode of Bite the Talk, where we are amplifying youth voices in food systems. Today we are hearing from a youth leader who is shaping our food systems. I'm your host, Mark Gachagua, and I'm looking forward to asking and investigating why meaningful youth involvement is so important. Imagine a world where young people, you being one of them, are at the heart of decision-making, crafting policies that address climate change, environmental sustainability, and social justice. Now, I know that sounds empowering, and today I'm speaking with Eugenia, an inspiring youth leader who is doing just that, breaking barriers and making an impact in food systems. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and let's get started. Eugenia, hi, how are you doing today?
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
We are thrilled to have you. Please tell us about yourself and, your journey in the food system space.
Yeah, so my food systems journey first started in Hong Kong, where I grew up. And when I was there, I started learning more about meat consumption. So my food systems journey started through learning about the impacts of industrial agriculture and how that impacts our health, but also the environment and animal well-being. And through that, I sort of fell down this rabbit hole where I started to see how food connected to everything. I learned about how it was connected to education, starting from a young age, where students could learn about nutrition and learn about gardening through schools and how that would connect to their environmental education. And I started learning about how food connects to the climate and how our food choices affect the environment and how it connects to health as well. And I started to see how interdisciplinary this was and how food connects to everything, and as a result is a very powerful point of entry to enact change. And learning about this has inspired me to conduct research in different places and also work in different levels of policy engagement. And during university, I designed an interdisciplinary major in sustainable food systems and global development to learn about these connections and try to understand how agriculture and food more broadly can be used as a way to promote social, ecological, and economic well-being. And so through this, I've explored a lot of different sides of the food systems, and ultimately I view food as a really powerful tool. And I think it's important for youth to be involved in this space because food ultimately connects to everyone and it affects everyone. And there's this one quote that really resonates with me that says, "Youth are 25% of the population, but 100% of the future," which is why I think it's essential for food systems advocacy to involve youth voices.
Fantastic. I like that, the background that you shared with us, that you grew up in a society or in a community where there's a lot of meat consumption. And also you mentioned that, food is a powerful tool, and I tend to agree with you quite a lot. Eugenia, I know you're part of the Act for Food youth leaders. Do you mind telling us what Act for Food is and what you're doing there?
Yeah, so Act for Food is a global campaign that's hosted by GAIN and essentially recruits youth leaders from all across the world. I believe there are 25 of us this year who are part of this movement, and all of us represent different backgrounds, but we're all united by a shared goal to advocate for more sustainable food systems, but also food systems that are more equitable and just and represent youth voices. And so recently we spent some time in Arusha where we had a workshop that convened all 25 youth leaders, including youth leaders as well as representatives from Tanzania and also representatives from GAIN like Mark himself, who led us in different workshops. And we are focused on 3 different collected actions. So one of them is indigenous and local foods, and really trying to integrate that into trying to prioritize that among youth and reconnect young people with their local foods. The other one is school food and nutrition. And so really promoting healthy food consumption, but also education around nutrition in schools. And the third one is holding multinational corporations accountable. And so trying to shift away from these large corporations dominating the food scene and allowing for more local ingredients to take priority, and also just advocating for, it goes hand in hand with the indigenous food strand, I think, because while you're challenging these large corporations, you're also advocating for more local indigenous bread seeds and food options as well. And so those are the three topics that After-Food youth leaders focus on, and all of us are developing localized projects in our own countries while focusing on these shared goals and working collaboratively to develop plans to achieve this.
That sounds very nice. I've had the privilege of meeting some of the Act for Food youth leaders, and I must say it's a powerhouse. It's a diverse group of very, very talented and gifted young people. So, we're really honored to be associated with you. I know, Eugenia, in your work, even what you just described, there's a lot of advocacy work in it. There's a lot of policy intersections with the collective actions that you guys are working on. Tell us, do you see or have you encountered any barriers, or do you know of any barriers that young people face when trying to engage in policy work?
Yeah, definitely. I think one major barrier is just opportunity gaps. And before joining After-Food, and honestly still, I think I find it very challenging to find pathways into these high-level discussions. So there are all these different UN forums, like the UN Food System Summit, Stocktake, which is happening soon. But for young people to get a seat on the table in these discussions, I think there's no clear path for that. And I think After-Food is doing really amazing work in involving youth voices and bridging that gap between young people and all these high-level conventions. And I think it's really important to have this space for youth to feel like their voices are representative, not just in a way that they're being tokenized as youth, but really their perspectives are being integrated. And so I think that's a major gap. So just understanding where these opportunities exist, but also how to get involved with them and what existing pathways exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Even reflecting back in my journey as a youth advocate, I think one other major barrier was, even lack of knowledge and lack of information. I mean, combine that with lack of the opportunity. I mean, what kind of change can that influence? But we're happy to know that there are youth who actually have this knowledge and they've had those opportunities to influence. I mean, even with the current stock taking moment, and even linking this to the comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, there's a lot of youth talk in terms of how youth can be involved. And even just thinking about it, why should youth involvement matter so much, Eugenia? Why should it matter to us?
Yeah, totally. I mentioned this quote earlier, but I'm going to mention it again because this is something that has really driven my advocacy and something that has really kept me grounded in this youth work. And it's a quote that youth make up 25% of the population, but are 100% of the future. I think it's so important to recognize that youth, even currently, plays such a major role in society. And it's as simple as the fact that food choices affect us, and food choices will continue to affect us for generations. And I think it should be a right for young people to have influence on all the factors that are shaping what impacts our health, what impacts our environment, what impacts our education. And I think one example is in the case of food marketing and the different tactics that marketing agencies will deploy towards food consumers, and how this particularly affects young people, especially below the age of 5, for example, because these tactics will oftentimes condition people to choose unhealthier options. And we are often told that we have a choice, but this is dictated by a lot of these forces that we don't have control of. And so I think in those types of cases, it's important that youth get a say so that we aren't just blindly being affected by these policies, but actually get to share our perspective and determine how they are shaped and how they are going to affect us and continue to affect us in years to come.
I agree, and that's a very big, ambitious task to take up. But I think it's worthwhile, and I like the fact that you've mentioned it. We usually say, and I continue to say this as a senior Gen Z, nothing for the youth without the youth. And I think that resonates with many young people, and it's just an emphasis on looking at young people not just as participants or recipients of support, but actually seeing them as people who can actually contribute to development and many other wonderful things. Eugenia, I was actually tempted to ask you what your favorite food is as you're talking about food marketing. But as you think about that, or maybe you can tell us that, but as you're going to tell us about, what strategies have worked for you in overcoming the barriers that many youth face. I know there's some who, opt to have, vehicles such as youth advocacy networks. I think Actual Food is a very nice example. Others have, taken up mentorship as a vehicle which can help them overcome. Have any of these worked for you?
I would say my favorite food, I have a few, but the one I will say today is tofu. And this is my favorite just because it's such a staple in my diet growing up. I grew up in Hong Kong, and so it's very common in Chinese food. And I have been vegetarian for a while, so it's something that I've been able to keep as a staple and always reminds me of home.
Very good. Mine is sukuma wiki, also known as kilts. I don't want to go so deep into that, but I'm sure the audience will also appreciate your favorite food, and congrats on your journey as a vegetarian.
Yeah, so I think the biggest success for me in terms of overcoming these barriers has simply been reaching out to like-minded people and connecting with them. And so that can start online, whether it be platforms like LinkedIn or Instagram, and then it can carry into offline spaces, and I think that can be very powerful. I'm a big fan of these cold messages and informational interviews because I think as youth, the best people we can learn from are other youth who have been in a similar situation and are facing the same barriers that we do. And so one time when I was working for the Urban Food Policy Institute in New York City, I actually found someone who was in the city doing food advocacy that I was really drawn to. And so I reached out to them, and they very generously offered to support me with things. And they actually ended up giving me a badge to the high-level political forum on sustainable development in the city, which I wasn't expecting at all when I reached out. But I think there are these unexpected outcomes if you reach out to people and engage in these conversations and have a clear interest. And unfortunately, a major part is about knowing the right people. And so I think in order to access these people, it's imperative to do everything possible to build these networks and really put yourself out there to make those connections possible.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of benefit in also nurturing these relationships with the duty bearers, for example, or even, for example, with the UN and people who are working there and many other partners in the private sector. I think it's meaningful for even, young people to start nurturing those relationships and seeing how we can work together. There's something I like, it's called youth-adult partnership, whereby the young people are bringing the innovative ideas, the good ideas, the bold ideas, the freshness that is needed. And at the same time, they can learn from the experience of their older counterparts. So that's really nice. And I'm happy that you had that opportunity. Now, shifting gears a bit, Eugenia, we want to look at solutions. I mean, we've talked about some of the challenges and the barriers, but, I think it's important to also touch on, some solutions. So what can governments, private sector, non-governmental organizations, or any other institution, what can they do to better support youth engagement in the food system space?
Yeah, I think it's as simple as creating space. I think a lot of these governments, NGOs, and institutions have a lot of power, and creating the opportunities for youth to have a say is a very, very important solution. And I know that organizations like ProVeg, which advocate for better food systems for health and for animal well-being and for all these other different reasons. I know they have a youth food policy board. I'm not involved with it, but I've always seen it come up, and I know some people who are involved with it. And I think that sort of youth engagement is very powerful because it really goes a long way in showing that you care about these voices and you want them to influence policies, you want them to influence the decision-making that goes behind your organization. And similarly, I think GAIN is doing amazing work in investing in young people, just all this financial investment in Act for Food, but also the resources, the time. For Act for Food, we had weekly sessions leading up to the in-person workshop that we had. And even that really equipped us with different skills that are needed in this space. And so for organizations to institute this kind of environment for learning for young people can have really powerful effects. And so I think making that a priority is the number one thing that organizations can do to support youth engagement in food systems.
Yeah, great. Great. I hope they're listening. Eugenia, I was just imagining earlier on you mentioned that you were in New York, and I was just asking myself, and maybe this is a nice question for me to ask you. Let's say you had an opportunity to speak to, world leaders today who can influence the way resources are flowing into food systems, who are influencing how policies are being implemented or even being developed. If you had an opportunity to speak at the United Nations in New York and you have all the leaders there, what will you tell them in terms of food systems and young people? What will be your message to them?
Yeah, I think I would first, depending on the background of the politician, I would try to frame food systems and the significance of food system transformation from the perspective of what they do. And I mentioned at the start that food is so interdisciplinary, and I think that you can really convince anyone to care about food system transformation by connecting it to what they do. And for example, if someone is part of some climate negotiations or part of the environment, I think framing food systems from that angle would be very powerful. And so just really driving in those facts about how food waste contributes to global carbon emissions and how there are all these disparities in food access and how that connects to different climate issues and climate matters. And then, for example, if I was talking to someone who is more focused on education, as I mentioned earlier, I'd probably frame it as how nutrition contributes to educational well-being for students and how being able to eat good food can have ripple effects on a young person's future. And having that knowledge connects people to their land and connects people to their culture, to their history. And yeah, just really trying to drive home the point that food is connected to everything and why I feel so strongly about the need for food system transformation. It's because if you can influence these policies, you can really have these trickle effects on all these other fields and ultimately lead to greater well-being overall.
Yeah, I agree. We have what we call the Sustainable Development Goals. We have N4G, Nutrition for Growth. These are all, global commitments that many governments have committed to. We also have the most recent Kampala Declaration, which was endorsed by over 50 heads of states in Africa. And there's a common theme among these. One is to make sure that we have nutritious food. Number two is to make sure there is a sustainable development and, more so in the food systems sector. So that's good, Eugenia. What's your parting shot? Just, from a bird's eye view, what's your parting shot in terms of how youth can make sure or can add value to strengthening our food systems across the world?
So in one of the active food leadership sessions that we had, we watched this TED Talk. The speaker talked about starting a movement or leading a movement and the three things that you have to know. And the one that stuck with me the most was the first tip she gave, which was start with what you know. And similarly to the response that I gave to the previous question, I think everyone brings such a unique perspective to the world. And I think all of that can apply to food systems advocacy as well. And so whatever your role is, if it's in art, using art as a form of food systems advocacy as a way to compel people to think more about these issues, think about these issues more deeply. And whether it's coding, maybe you can contribute your software engineering skills to building an app that reduces food waste, or building an app that helps people understand the source of their food so that they can question more about the source of their food and also learn more about these issues and translate that into advocacy. And I think my opinion is that everyone has these skills that they can bring to the table. And this movement is all about uniting those skills and creating something that balances what people are good at with what the world needs. And I think that's the most powerful way to move forward in this space.
Yeah, thank you, Eugenia. I agree with you. Everyone has a role to play, big or small, boy or girl, man or woman, wherever they are, they have something to chip in. So I completely agree with you. I think this has been a very, very interesting conversation, and I've learned quite a lot. Thank you very much, Eugenia, for joining us today. Your insights, not just interesting, but they're also global, and that has offered us a very rich perspective from you. The bottom line, well, youth voices are not just important, they are indispensable in shaping a more sustainable food system. So whether you are a student, an activist, a young farmer, or just someone who cares about the future of food, your voice matters. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, follow us, share, and keep the conversation alive. I've been your host, Mark Gachagua, and until next time, keep learning, keep leading. You are the change we need. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. Stay safe and eat healthy.